including even that Sears Tower and the John Hancock and all of those modernist buildings I showed you earlier. Adrian Smith also designed the NBC Tower, which we'll get a really good look at on our right side coming up. That NBC Tower looks a lot older than it is. That is a really fun example of an architect referring to a building in another city, but still tying it here to Chicago. So you can see the NBC Tower just to the right here with some of those dark stripes, but we'll get even another look at that building once we pass by closer. All along your left side, you can see where the street has multiple levels. This is Wacker Drive. We've got 3 levels of Wacker Drive. First, the street surface level, and then a lower level for cars to get through downtown very quickly without having to worry about all of the pedestrians and the traffic above ground. And then there is a third, even lower level of Wacker. And that is where they stick all of the towed cars. So if you park incorrectly anywhere in the city, they will tow your car all the way down here. You'll have to come pick it up amongst the lower Wacker Drive. They also did lots of filming for the Batman movies in some of those lower Wacker tunnels. And we're passing by the Sheraton Hotel on the right side. Seems like a party. This is where a lot of the presidents stay when they come into town, because this Sheraton Hotel is the only one with bulletproof glass. We're getting another good look at that NBC Tower on the right. They designed it to look just like 30 Rock in New York, which is why it looks Art Deco in style, because it's referring to that other building in New York. But since it's a postmodern building in Chicago, it has to reference something here too. So they added those squared off archways on the first setback of this NBC Tower as a direct reference to the flying buttresses on the Tribune Tower, which we'll see just next to the Apple Store on the right side. You also see that building with the yellow onion dome on the top of it off to the right. That's the Intercontinental Hotel. It was built for the Shriners, which is a group of Freemasons. They were very inspired by that Moorish architecture. Another building that was built for that organization is the Medina Temple, which is our current casino that's in the River North area. We're passing that Apple Store ahead on our right side. It's got this amazing see-through glass. It almost blends into the Chicago Riverwalk, but they did design the roof to look like your MacBook laptop. And behind that Apple Store, we can get a look at that Tribune Tower with those gorgeous flying buttresses all the way at the top of it. This French Gothic tower is from 1925, home to our news headquarters. It is now expensive residences. They've just converted that building. Some of the studio spaces in there sold for about $400,000, where some of the bigger penthouses went for about $7 million. I like to recommend walking around that Tribune at street level, because a lot of those news reporters, while they were out investigating stories, brought a piece back with them. So they embedded a piece of the Taj Mahal, a piece of the Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, over 150 international sites. Rocks and stones and gems are all embedded in that lower level of the Tribune. So you can see them all and almost walk around the world, just walking around that one building. And even more wedding cake Beaux-Art buildings. We're starting to see some of the nighttime glows. We're passing the London Guarantee and Accident building on the left here with the Belvedere on the top, which means beautiful view. It is now home to the London House Hotel. They've got a really cool rooftop bar, so I'd recommend checking out that London House Hotel. There are a lot of really nice rooftop bars right around the river here that'll give you some close-up looks at a lot of the architecture we have around here. That London House is one. We'll see one called Raised coming up, also on the left. But first we can see an Italian frosted cake, that jeweler's building with the dome all the way at the top of it. It heads off Wabash Avenue here, which is our Jewelers Row in Chicago. So lots of jewelry stores all along Wabash. And that building was built for jewelers. Unfortunately, in the 1920s, they were afraid of being robbed on their way from their cars into their shops. So that jeweler's building built an elevator for cars. That way the workers could drive right in and take an elevator up to their shop with all of their jewels in tow, keeping them safe. Then at the end of the day, same thing. They got into the elevator with their car and took it all the way back down. We're also going to get to see a lot of postmodern masterpieces along our left side here. First up is the Leo Burnett building, which is at 35 West Wacker. This building that's got all these little silver pieces in the windows, kind of looks a little bit like checkers. Those little silver pieces in the window are the architect's way to talk about what's going on inside the building. They're supposed to represent the pencil tips of all of the advertisers that work in the Leo Burnett building, which made lots of well-known ad campaigns like the Pillsbury Doughboy and Tony the Tiger. Some of those very iconic characters came from Leo Burnett. And when Leo Burnett first started their agency, they were told they wouldn't make a penny. So they covered the ceiling of that postmodern skyscraper's lobby in pennies. If you walk right in at the first floor, you'll see that penny ceiling all up there. Next on the left, 55 West Wacker is the short concrete building. Good example of brutalism. We don't have a lot of brutalism along the Chicago River, but it comes from the French word for concrete, béton brut. The next building after the brutalist one looks like a modern Greek column, or a modern version of like the Pantheon right here in Chicago, with a lot of references to Greek columns, but we don't have them right on the outside of the building. That one's called 77 West Wacker, and it's worth a visit a little bit later in the night because Pierre Arnaud, who did the lighting of the Louvre, also did the lighting of that building. They shine 540 lamps onto the facade at night, and it looks so beautiful and stunning. So I highly recommend coming back here. We do get to see a little bit of the Reed Murdoch's nighttime look with all of those lights shining on that brick. And I've done a lot of talking about buildings like they are cakes, but I also like to talk about the Chicago First School of Architecture like it's the mullet hairstyle. And this building on the left is a great example of that Chicago School of Architecture, where at the bottom we have a grand entrance, and then in the middle you have your orderly columns and rows for your business, your offices or hotel or whatever's going to be the business of that building. And in keeping with our mullet metaphor, that leaves us party. The party's on the top. If you look at the top of the building, they have more true classical Greek columns. When the grand entrance at the bottom, it's just a reference to a column. So I like to say it to you that way because the party's on the top. And as long as you keep walking around Chicago and you're looking at all of our amazing buildings, make sure you don't miss the party. You'll see a lot of extra flourishes and decorations on the top of our building. Throughout all different time periods too, not just that 1920s. We've got a postmodern building coming up here on our left. If you look all the way at the top of it, you'll see that the party is a bridge. You have a L train going across the track right there. And this 225 West Wacker building that's got the bridge detailing on the top of it, giving that building a lot of reason to be right here in the city. Every night at 9 p.m. there is a light show right here. It shines on the Merchandise Mart. It's called Art on the Mart, and you can watch it from the Riverwalk. It is free every single night at 9 p.m. Usually if I'm working, I'll start to see groups gathering as it starts to get closer. We're also going to notice that the Riverwalk kind of abruptly ends around here. You can walk all the way from Wolf Point here to Lake Michigan at the height of the river. But it took a while to complete this project. The Riverwalk didn't finish until 2016. And that's because it took acts of Congress to build out all of the sections that go underneath the bridges. This is because the Chicago River is considered a federal waterway. So anytime that you are technically narrowing the shipping channel, you have to get congressional approval. So for all of those little bridges that go under, all of the little paths that go underneath the bridges, they need Congress approval. So we don't have one over here yet. It is now a requirement for any building that is built along the river to provide public access to the riverfront or connect to any existing riverwalk that is there. But we'll get to see more of our buildings built around the active train tracks on our right side of the river. So we are also approaching a low bridge. I do want to make sure that we are all in our seats for this one. It's a particularly low one. Ahead on our left side, we're going to get a look at a postmodern building where the architect referenced historical architecture, the building that used to be in that spot. This is the Bank of America Tower, which is now 55 stories tall. You can see how big it is just ahead on the left side. What used to be on that spot was a very short administrative building for Morton Salt. And we do still have a big Morton Salt factory in the north part of the city. But here, a 5-story tall building might even stick out against a lot of the skyscrapers that we have here. It's not making very good use of the land when we could instead build a 55-story tall tower. But that Morton Salt building had these really cool trident-shaped spandrels incorporated into that building. So the Bank of America Tower, when they built here in 2021, also incorporated those trident-shaped spandrels from that Morton Salt building. But here we can see they're supporting the whole tower. That's the way that this building provides that public access to the river. It's actually underneath a good portion of that building. We're passing the Boeing headquarters on our right side. This is another building built over those active train tracks. In fact, there were so many train tracks underneath this building and underneath the southwest corner that they had nowhere to put an underneath support. So the architects had to support that corner of the building from the top. And they actually left an exposed metal truss system to celebrate this achievement of cantilevering that one corner of the building in order to support the whole rest of the structure. They left that metal truss exposed to celebrate that architectural achievement and also to reference all of the bridges that are right here next to that Boeing headquarters. As we pass by the Civic Opera building on the left, this one was built in 1929 right along the river because they wanted to use river water for the hydraulic lifts of the stage inside. Since opera is not particularly profitable, they built those 3 office towers around in order to subsidize the theater. It was a really good idea, but I mentioned earlier that building was built in 1929. That was right around the time of the Great Depression. So that building was built by Samuel Insull, who provided electricity for the masses. It was a great idea to subsidize the theater with those office towers, but unfortunately, very bad timing with the Depression right there. We're also passing by the Merck building again on the left, this one with a huge 40,000 square foot trading floor. They've got a lot of executives and a lot of important people that work in this building, and probably even more that feel that important and want to be that important. And they wanted everyone to be happy. So they serrated the corners. That way, instead of having one corner office at each corner, they could have four, leading to four happy executives instead of just one in each corner, and that would be 16 on the whole floor as opposed to just four. So we can see those serrated corners as we pass that Merck building. You can also see the active train tracks off to your right side. See some of the metro lines. There's also Amtrak trains that come in through here. We are right next to Union Station. It's just over here. And we're also going to get some good looks at the Sears Tower again. And that observatory, the sky ledge and the sky deck on the 103rd floor of the Sears Tower, up on the left. Sears originally built that tower in 1974 because they wanted to consolidate office space from multiple buildings around the Chicagoland area into just one downtown. There's 4.8 million square feet of space inside that Sears Tower, which if we wanted to compare to another building we saw along the tour, the Merchandise Mart, where they do the art on the mart, the big canvas building is 4.2 million square feet. So still considerably more with this tall tower. It is now called the Willis Tower, because Willis Insurance Company moved in, purchased the naming rights about 2009. A lot of us Chicagoans will still be calling it the Sears though. It is the Sears. They've recently also redone the observatory. They built a whole little museum, which is great because before people used to wait around the block outside in the heat, in the cold and whatever, but now they've got an intricate museum and timed ticket entries, so they really thought that out and have improved it. And they named the lobby area Catalog as a little nod to the Sears catalogs of before. So we'll get another look at those observatories right up here. But you don't have to get all the way up to the Sears Tower in order to get an aerial view. In fact, we'll get one from this boat just now. There is a You Are Here map on the Modernist building on the left side as soon as we pass this bridge. When new owners took over in 2014 and realized how many people were passing by, they wanted their building to get put on the map of being talked about. So they put a map on our building. The little red box signifies where this building is along the river. And if you look past that and keep looking up on the map, you'll see that Y shape that I mentioned. That represents Wolf Point, and how we got that shape and fit it into our architecture all around the city. Another postmodern building coming up on our left side. This is 311 South Wacker, this pink concrete building with all the lights on the top. Built in the 1980s, so they knew they couldn't be taller than the Sears Tower, built just across the street. So they decided to be brighter. The architects put 1,852 fluorescent tubes at the top of that building. There is one huge light crown and 4 smaller light crowns around it that also make that building look like a reference of a Chicago nickname, the City of Broad Shoulders. That building was so light when they first lit up those fluorescent tubes at the top that it was changing the migratory patterns of birds, and they quite literally had to tone it down. We're also passing the largest post office in the world on the right side. Beginning to see the nighttime look of that building too. This one was designed by Graham Anderson Probst and White, who also did that Wrigley building. Largest post office in the world. It is now an office building that's got some tech companies in there. They also completely redid the roof to be a 3-acre park with a running path that goes all around. And you could see that from that observatory on top of the Sears Tower. But built in 1920, that post office became obsolete. So we built another one, but we figured this location was perfect, so we put it right here across the street. And now we can see the active post office that was built in 1996 by Knight Architects. This one very, very modern, especially compared to 1920. They put enough conveyor belts in this post office to stretch all the way from here in Chicago to St. Louis. And I always love to point out this post office. The captain did say it was my last tour of this season. My mommy used to work there. Growing up here, I used to pick her up from the night shift sometimes, all the way at night. But there's another building along this area that means something to me. It's special. It's where we met just a few hours ago, River City. Right? Looks very similar to the Marina City, the Corncob Towers that we passed earlier in that main branch of the river. This one was built by the same architect, Bertrand Goldberg. This working marina that's part of River City is aerated. So it's different from the marina underneath Marina City. This one, boats can stay there all year long. So normally our boats would come out in the winter because some of the water might start to freeze, but not in this aerated marina where they just keep that air flowing so that way it never freezes. City within a city, there are doctors' offices and schools and all sorts of other city services in this building, not just restaurants and shops like our downtown city in a city. We are approaching the Roosevelt Street Bridge. And every time I get around Roosevelt Street, especially right here, talking about Chicago, I'm reminded of that huge event that changed our history and redeveloped our city. This is, of course, the Great Chicago Fire. Happened in 1871. And in 1871, our entire city of Chicago was made of wood, because we were built on a swampland. People were sinking into the very wet soil, so they covered everything in wood. But around October, it's our dry season. And in October of 1871, they had experienced a 3-week drought, which even our own Tribune newspaper put out a very ominous warning, the same morning of the fire, that the conditions of that drought had left the city so dry it could burn from end to end with just a spark. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So the story goes that Mrs. O'Leary went to go milk her cow Daisy because she wanted a glass of milk at night. And if you want a glass of milk at night, you have to bring the lantern with you. So something must have spooked the cow, who kicked the lantern into a pile of hay, which immediately caught fire. The whole barn burned down, and then it burnt through 1/3 of the city. Well, that was the story. But the journalist who printed that later revealed that he completely made it up. He lied. Mrs. O'Leary claimed that she was in bed at the time of the fire, but unfortunately, anti-Irish sentiment was very, very high at that time. So she was very, very easy to blame. Some people blamed another Irishman of the neighborhood, but the truth is, we'll never really know. The fire did start in Mrs. O'Leary's barn just a